March 12, 2024, Melbourne. A quiet suburb wakes to the sound of a single gunshot. Moments later, 64-year-old John Latorre lies dead in his driveway, executed with cold precision. Police say it was a targeted hit, likely tied to the Calabrian Mafia, the Ndrangheta, the same network controlling 70% of the world's cocaine trade. For over a century, they've ruled through silence, fear, and blood. And John's murder, it wasn't random, it was a message. The shadow world of the Ndrangheta. To understand why John Latorre was killed, you first need to understand who might have ordered it. The Ndrangheta, pronounced Ndrangheta, isn't just another mafia group. It's the Calabrian Mafia, one of the most powerful and dangerous criminal organizations in the world. While the Sicilian Cosa Nostra stole the spotlight for years, thanks to Hollywood, movies, and flashy mob trials, the Ndrangheta quietly built something much bigger. Today, they control an estimated 70% of the global cocaine trade. That's not just power, that's empire-level dominance. Unlike the loud, cigar-smoking mobsters you see in movies, the Ndrangheta prefer the shadows. They live quietly, in regular homes, blending into ordinary neighborhoods. An Australian Federal Police Assistant Commissioner once said, "It's entirely possible that people would be living next door to Ndrangheta members without ever knowing it. They don't show off with gold chains or Ferraris. They run fruit shops, cafes, and small restaurants. Some even coach local soccer teams and go to church every Sunday. But behind that mask of normal life, they manage billion-dollar drug operations and global money laundering networks." The Ndrangheta's roots in Australia go back further than most people realize, more than a century, in fact. According to a 1965 ASIO report, 3 Calabrian men arrived on a ship called Re d'Italia in December 1922. They docked in Adelaide after sailing from Calabria. One of them, Antonio Barbaro, nicknamed the Toad, settled in Melbourne. Domenico Strano made his way to New South Wales, and a third man, whose name was never confirmed, set up in Perth. Those 3 laid the foundations for what would become one of Australia's most powerful organized crime networks. By the 1960s, Australian authorities were already seeing what Italian police would only later admit. The Calabrian Mafia had planted itself deep in Australian soil. They'd even formed what investigators later called the Australian Crimin, a leadership council that kept the organization united and stopped it from fracturing into rival gangs. Blood in the market. A history of violence. When the Ndrangheta built their power base in Australia, it wasn't through drug labs or nightclub rackets. Their first real battlefield was the wholesale fruit and vegetable markets. It sounds almost harmless, but control of Melbourne's Victoria Market meant control of millions in cash every week, influence over thousands of workers, and a perfect front for washing dirty money from drug deals. And when someone threatened that control, they killed for it. In 1964, a man named Vincent Murator was shot dead as he left for work, gunned down in the early morning hours, just like John Latorre would be. Nearly 60 years later, decades later, Vincent's son, Alfonso Muratori, met the same end. He was murdered outside his home, another driveway execution. Alfonso had married the daughter of Liborio Benvenuto, who was widely considered Melbourne's Ndrangheta godfather in the 1980s. Before his death in 1988, Liborio had even chosen Alfonso as his successor, but Alfonso refused. And that refusal was a fatal mistake. He left both the position and his wife, choosing instead to be with another woman, Karen Mansfield, who wasn't part of the Calabrian community. In the world of the Ndrangheta, where loyalty and family honor mean everything, that wasn't just betrayal, it was blasphemy. From that moment, Alfonso's fate was sealed. Neither Vincent's nor Alfonso's murders were ever solved. Then, in May 2000, Liborio's own son, Francesco Frank Benvenuto, was shot dead while sitting in his car, again in his driveway. The similarities to John Latorre's killing are impossible to ignore. Same quiet suburb, same early morning timing, same cold efficiency. Frank's murder, too, remains officially unsolved, but investigators have long suspected it was payback for Alfonso Muratori's death. This is the pattern. The driveway killings, the early morning ambushes, the victims caught in that split second between leaving home and starting their day, and after every one of these murders comes the same thing: silence. The kind of silence that keeps detectives guessing, and the killers untouchable. The code of Omerta. a conspiracy of silence. When John Latorre's daughter, Antoinette, stood before mourners at his funeral inside St. Monica's Catholic Church in Moonee Ponds on March 23, 2024, the crowd was overwhelming. The church couldn't even hold everyone who came. Hundreds stood outside on the street, watching the service from big screens, united in shock and grief. Among them was Mick Gatto, one of Melbourne's most recognizable underworld figures. Back in 2005, Gatto was acquitted of murder after shooting hitman Andrew Benji Veniamin. A killing the jury accepted was done in self-defense. Inside that church, Antoinette spoke through tears, calling her father a pillar of strength. She told mourners that she'd rushed to him the moment she learned he'd been shot. Her voice trembled as she said, "I want you to know I tried everything I could that morning to help you. I was right by you, as you are with me." To those who knew him, John Latorre was exactly what he seemed, a hard-working businessman, a devoted father, and a respected figure in Melbourne's Italian community. But behind closed doors, police saw a different picture. They confirmed Latorre was known to them, and they didn't mince words. This wasn't random. It was a targeted attack. Detectives immediately began exploring links to organized crime, specifically the Calabrian Mafia. The Ndrangheta, despite a huge investigation, despite detectives combing through CCTV footage from Greenvale and nearby Gladstone Park, and even after appealing for dashcam footage from anyone passing through the area between 2 and 6 a.m. on March 12th, no arrests have been made. Why? One word explains it all. Omertà. Omertà is more than silence. It's an ancient southern Italian code, a rule that defines how the Mafia survives. It isn't just about refusing to talk to police. It's a way of life, a survival instinct born from centuries of oppression and mistrust of the state. The code demands absolute loyalty to your blood, your family, and your organization, even if you've been wronged, even if you're staring down a prison sentence for something you didn't do, even if you know death is near, you never talk. You never betray the family. Breaking that code means death, and not a quiet one. A slow, brutal execution meant to terrify anyone else thinking about talking. Former detective Colin McLaren, who spent years undercover infiltrating the Ndrangheta in Griffith, Melbourne, and Adelaide during the early 1990s, put it bluntly when asked about Latorre's murder. Probably the police won't solve it. It's just the way it is. The code of silence and the fear of being killed in such a horrific way, that's what keeps people silent. And McLaren isn't exaggerating. This code of silence has already claimed others. In 1977, Donald Mackay, a furniture store owner and anti-drugs campaigner from Griffith, New South Wales, vanished after having drinks with friends at a local hotel. When police arrived, they found bloodstains, drag marks, and 3 spent .22 caliber cartridges in the parking lot. His body was never found. Mackay's mistake was simple. He'd tipped off police about massive marijuana plantations controlled by Ndrangheta families, and for that, he paid the price. Despite a royal commission, decades of investigation, and reward money totaling over $200,000, nobody has ever been charged with his murder. A hitman named James Basley was convicted of conspiracy to murder Mackay, but the real masterminds, the ones who gave the order, walked free. The Royal Commission eventually named 6 suspects, all tied to the Calabrian Mafia, but every one of them had a perfect alibi. Some were even drinking with police officers the night Mackay disappeared. That's the power of Omertà. That's why, just like Donald Mackay's disappearance, John Latorre's murder may never be solved. The 3 reasons why the Ndrangheta kills Professor Anna Sergi, one of the world's leading experts on the Calabrian Mafia and a criminologist at the University of Essex, once told Australian media that to understand a Ndrangheta killing, you first need to understand how they think. She explained that the organization doesn't kill often, not because they're merciful, but because murder is expensive. It brings heat. It attracts headlines, police raids, and unwanted attention. So when they do pull the trigger, it's never random. It's for one of 3 reasons. The first, preventative killings, murders designed to stop something before it happens. Maybe someone was about to talk, or a threat was growing too close for comfort. These hits are cold, logical moves meant to protect the organization. The second, revenge killings, blood for blood. When someone breaks the code, betrays the family, or brings dishonor, punishment is inevitable. It's not just revenge. its restoration, a way to balance what the Ndrangheta sees as their own moral order, and the third, demonstrative killings, executions made to be seen. Their warnings, messages, shows of dominance meant to remind everyone who holds the power. John Latorre's murder, shot dead in his own driveway in the early morning, his family left to find him, carries every sign of that third kind. A demonstration, a statement. But the question remains, why him? And what could he have done that made someone decide he needed to die? The Tomato Sauce Day confrontation, for more than a year, that question had no answer. Then, in April 2025, a new lead surfaced, and it changed everything. According to reporting by Professor Anna Sergi and other investigators, John Latorre had become entangled in a bitter family feud with two brothers who'd recently come to Australia from Calabria. The confrontation boiled over during a family gathering known as Tomato Sauce Day, a deeply rooted Calabrian tradition where families come together to make tomato sauce in bulk, preserving a piece of home and heritage. But that day, instead of laughter and family bonding, it turned into chaos. In front of everyone, John lashed out at the brothers, calling them dogs and insulting anyone connected to them. It wasn't just anger, it was humiliation, delivered publicly in a culture where respect and pride mean everything. The feud had deep roots. Those brothers were related to John's business partner, who was also his brother-in-law. They'd come to Australia less than a decade earlier after their father was killed in Oppido, Calabria, back in 2011. At first, John had helped them. He'd even guided them in buying an Italian restaurant in Melbourne's northern suburbs. But things soured quickly. The brothers allegedly tried to muscle their way into John's fruit and vegetable wholesale business, the same industry that's long been the Ndrangheta's playground in Australia, their cover for laundering money and controlling cash flow. John refused. He stood his ground, and at that Tomato Sauce Day gathering, he made his rejection loud and clear for everyone to hear. In the eyes of the Ndrangheta, that wasn't just a falling out, it was a declaration of war. Publicly calling someone dogs and demanding your family cut ties with them isn't just disrespect, it's a challenge to authority. And in a culture built on hierarchy and honor, that kind of defiance doesn't go unanswered. Adding fuel to the fire, one of the brothers' businesses went up in flames not long before John's murder, an apparent arson with all the hallmarks of a Mafia warning. So the question became, were these tit-for-tat moves spiraling towards something inevitable, an execution meant to settle the score? Underworld sources painted an unflattering picture of the brothers. They were described as reckless, disrespectful, even buffoons. Some, within Melbourne's Italian community, whispered that they'd overstayed their welcome and should go back to Calabria. Whether they were directly involved in John's killing is still unproven, but the timing, a public confrontation followed by a cold-blooded driveway murder, is hard to ignore. Professor Sergi offered an unsettling explanation. She suggested Latorre's murder might not have come from the old guard of the Ndrangheta, but from a new generation, younger, more impulsive, and far less disciplined. The older bosses understood patience. They knew every murder brought heat from the police. Killing was a last resort, a strategic act. But this younger generation, they're unpredictable, emotional, and quick to use violence to make a point. If Sergi is right, John Latorre's death wasn't just revenge or punishment, it was symbolic. A sign that a more violent, unstable chapter of the Ndrangheta has begun. Generation that no longer hides in the shadows, but sends its messages through blood. The motorcycle in the darkness. As detectives dug deeper into the murder of John Latorre, one clue started to stand out: a motorcycle. Investigators believed the killer had come and gone on a smaller model bike, one that made a loud, distinctive sound echoing through the quiet suburban streets that night. They scoured the area around Buchanan Place, Elphinstone Boulevard, Glencairn Road, Barrymore Road, and Mickleham Road, hoping someone, anyone, had seen or heard that motorcycle between 2 and 6 a.m. on March 12th. They called for dashcam footage, knocked on doors, made public appeals, but the bike was never found. It simply vanished. Why a motorcycle? Because for a professional hitman, it's the ideal choice. It's fast, easy to maneuver through traffic, and can take back routes that a car never could. Unlike a vehicle with visible license plates, a bike can slip through the dark, unnoticed. And in those early morning hours, a lone rider on a quiet road doesn't raise eyebrows, just another worker heading out before dawn. That one decision using a motorcycle, said a lot about the kind of killer they were dealing with. This wasn't some heated argument that turned deadly. This was calculated, planned, and executed with precision. Whoever did this knew Latorre's schedule, studied his routine, and picked the perfect time and place to strike. Even the way it was done told a story. One shot, one perfectly placed bullet. Instant death, no panic, no wasted movement, no chaos. Just someone doing a job. Clean, efficient, and likely not for the first time. Melbourne's gangland wars, context and consequences. John Latorre's death wasn't just another isolated act of violence. It happened in a city long scarred by organized crime. Melbourne, a place once known for its bloody gangland wars that claimed 36 lives between 1998 and 2010. Those years were brutal. They inspired the hit TV series Underbelly, and for good reason. The conflict was dominated by the Carlton crew and their rivals, all fighting for control over Melbourne's lucrative amphetamine trade. At the center of it all was Carl Williams, a baby-faced drug dealer who, as one reporter put it, looked like he could have been flipping burgers at McDonald's. But behind that harmless smile, he was orchestrating contract killings, taking out anyone who stood in his way, while the media feasted on the drama, the flashy cars, the public shootings, the courtroom showdowns. Another, quieter force was at work, the Calabrian Mafia, known as the Ndrangheta. They didn't need headlines. They didn't want fame. While people were watching Williams and Mick Gatto make the evening news, the Calabrian families were quietly tightening their grip on the drug trade, building influence one silent move at a time. They understood something the others didn't, that attention kills business. Let the loud ones attract the spotlight and the bullets. The real power lives in the shadows. Operate quietly. Use legitimate businesses as fronts. Keep your wealth hidden and your name out of the papers. And above all, never break the code of silence that has protected the Ndrangheta for over a century. And that's exactly why their strategy worked. Everyone remembers Carl Williams. Everyone knows Alphonse Gangitano. Their faces became tabloid legends. But ask the average Australian to name a single current Ndrangheta boss, and they can't. That isn't a coincidence. That's the point, the message. So what was the message written in John Latorre's blood that cold March morning? Maybe it was a warning, a signal to anyone thinking of upsetting the established order. Maybe it was punishment for an insult, or revenge in a long-running feud we'll never fully untangle. Or maybe, as Professor Sergi suggested, it was a show of force by a younger wave of Ndrangheta members announcing they're taking over. Whatever the immediate motive, the larger message is unmistakable. The Ndrangheta is still active, still powerful, and still willing to kill in Melbourne's suburbs. Decades of police operations, royal commissions, and task forces have not defeated them. Instead, they adapted, evolved, and continue to operate in Australia much the same way they have for more than a century. At John Latorre's funeral, hundreds remembered him as a good man, a hard worker, a loving father. His daughter's tearful tribute painted a picture of a man who lived with honor and integrity. Maybe that's the whole truth. Maybe John really was exactly what he appeared to be, and his death was a tragic, terrible mistake, a family fight that spilled into lethal violence. But perhaps there was more. Perhaps John moved in circles where the line between legitimate business and organized crime became blurred. Perhaps he knew things, saw things, or was involved in things that ultimately cost him his life. We may never know the full story. What we do know, at roughly 4:30 a.m. on March 12, 2024, a 64-year-old man was executed in his driveway. Police believe it was a targeted killing tied to organized crime. The investigation has stalled despite exhaustive effort. And unless something extraordinary happens, John Latorre's murder will probably join the long list of unsolved Ndrangheta killings that stretch back decades across Australia. Conclusion: a century of blood, John Latorre's story is, in many ways, the story of the Ndrangheta in Australia. It starts in 1922, when three men stepped off a ship in Adelaide, bringing with them the codes, rituals, and violence of rural Calabria. It winds through decades of market murders, drug trafficking, corrupt deals, and silenced witnesses. It includes royal commissions and major police operations that promise to break organized crime, but ultimately only grazed it. And if it ends at all, it ends the way so many of these stories have ended, in suburban driveways at dawn, with bodies cooling on the pavement and families left to piece together what happened and why.
The Ndrangheta has been described as controlling some 70% of the world's cocaine market. They've been linked to political corruption, multi-billion-dollar money laundering schemes, and criminal networks across every continent but Antarctica. They have survived and even thrived in Australia for more than a century, despite repeated efforts to stop them. John Latorre died on March 12, 2024, the latest casualty in an ongoing saga. He likely won't be the last. As long as the code of silence holds, as long as Omerta cannot be broken, the Ndrangheta will keep operating in the shadows, living next door, running businesses, attending funerals, and at times, when they choose, sending messages written in blood. The sun rose on March 12, 2024, and revealed John Latorre's body in his driveway on Buchanan Place. It set that evening on a stunned community, a grieving family, and an investigation that went nowhere. Somewhere in Melbourne, someone knows what happened and why, but they will never tell. They cannot tell. Breaking Omerta is a death sentence in itself. And so the cycle repeats. Another murder, another inquiry, another unsolved case. The Ndrangheta endures. The code holds. John Latorre's killer walks free, carrying only the knowledge that they delivered the message the organization wanted sent. That message still echoes through Melbourne's Italian community, through the pre-dawn wholesale fruit markets where fortunes are quietly made, and down the suburban streets where families now sleep uneasily, wondering who might be next. It's a message that has been delivered time and again over the last century. Cross the Ndrangheta and you die. Break Omerta and you die. Disrespect the organization and you die.